met with Dr. Bradshaw, my psychologist friend. He thought I should try to repeat the experience if I could. I told him I wasn't ready to die. "Oh, I don't think you'll do that," Dr. Bradshaw stated calmly. "Some of the fellows who practice yoga and those Eastern religions claim they can do it whenever they want to." I asked him, "Do what?" "Like get out of the physical body for a while," he replied. "They claim they can go all over the place. You ought to try it." I told him that was ridiculous. Nobody can travel around without their physical body. "Well, I wouldn't be too sure," Dr. Bradshaw replied calmly. "You ought to read something about the Hindus. Did you study any philosophy in college?" I said I had, but there was nothing I could recall about this traveling without the body business. "Maybe you didn't have the right philosophy, Professor. That's what it seems to me." Dr. Bradshaw lit a cigar, then looked at me. "Well, don't be so closed-minded. Try it and find out. As my old philosophy professor said, if you're blind in one eye, turn your head. And if you're blind in both eyes, then open your ears and listen." I asked what to do if you were deaf, too, but I didn't get a reply. I don't know what I would have done without his pragmatic approach and his wonderful sense of humor. It is a debt I shall never be able to repay. The vibrations came and went 6 more times before I got up the courage to try to repeat the experience. When I did, it was an anticlimax. With the vibrations in full force, I thought of floating upward, and I did. I smoothly floated up over the bed, and when I willed myself to stop, I did, floating in midair. It was not a bad feeling at all, but I was nervous about falling suddenly. After a few seconds, I thought myself downward, and a moment later I felt myself in bed again, with all normal physical senses fully operating. There had been no discontinuity in consciousness from the moment I lay down in bed until I got up after the vibrations faded. At the time, it was an exasperating mental block, which held me within the confines of the room where my physical body lay. With no other applicable terminology, I began to call the condition the second state, and the other non-physical body we seem to possess, the second body. So far, this terminology fits as well as anything else. It wasn't until the first evidential experience which could be checked that I seriously considered these to be anything but daydreams, hallucinations, a neurotic aberration, the beginnings of schizophrenia, fantasies caused by self-hypnosis, or worse. That first evidential experience was indeed a sledgehammer blow. If I accepted the data as fact, it struck hard at nearly all of my life experience to that date, my training, my concepts, and my sense of values. Most of all, it shattered my faith in the totality and certainty of our culture's scientific knowledge. I was sure our scientists had all the answers, or most of them. Conversely, if I rejected what was evident to me, if to no one else, then I would also be rejecting what I respected so greatly, that mankind's emancipation and upward struggle depends chiefly upon his translation of the unknown into the known, through the use of his intellect and the scientific principle. That was the dilemma. It may have been truly the touch of a magic wand and a gift bestowed. Since the late 19th century, science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And these sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview. I think that as we break out of it, the sciences will be regenerated. What I do in my book, The Science Delusion, which is called Science Set Free in the United States, is take the 10 dogmas or assumptions of science and turn them into questions, seeing how well they stand up if you look at them scientifically. None of them stand up very well. What I'm going to do is first run through what these 10 dogmas are,
But essentially, the 10 dogmas, which are the default worldview of most educated people all over the world, are first, that nature is mechanical or machine-like. The universe is like a machine. Animals and plants are like machines. We're like machines. In fact, we are machines. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase, with brains that are genetically programmed computers. Second, matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter. There's no consciousness in stars, in galaxies, in planets, in animals, in plants, and there ought not to be any in us either, if this theory is true. So a lot of the philosophy of mind over the last 100 years has been trying to prove that we're not really conscious at all. So the matter's unconscious, then the laws of nature are fixed. This is dogma 3. The laws of nature are the same now as they were at the time of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Not just the laws, but the constants of nature are fixed, which is why they're called constants. Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. It never changes in total quantity, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all sprang into existence from nowhere in a single instant. The 5th dogma is that nature is purposeless. There are no purposes in all nature, and the evolutionary process has no purpose or direction. Dogma 6, biological heredity is material. Everything you inherit is in your genes, or in epigenetic modifications of the genes, or in cytoplasmic inheritance. It's material. Dogma 7, memories are stored inside your brain as material traces. Somehow everything you remember is in your brain in modified nerve endings, phosphorylated proteins. No one knows how it works, but nevertheless, almost everyone in the scientific world believes it must be in the brain. Dogma 8, your mind is inside your head. All your consciousness is the activity of your brain and nothing more. Dogma 9, which follows from Dogma 8, psychic phenomena like telepathy are impossible. Your thoughts and intentions cannot have any effect at a distance because your mind's inside your head. Therefore, all the apparent evidence for telepathy and other psychic phenomena is illusory. People believe these things happen, but it's just because they don't know enough about statistics, or they're deceived by coincidences, or it's wishful thinking. And Dogma 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. That's why governments only fund research into mechanistic medicine and ignore complementary and alternative therapies. Those can't possibly really work because they're not mechanistic. They may appear to work because people would have got better anyway, or because of the placebo effect. But the only kind that really works is mechanistic medicine. Well, this is the default worldview, which is held by almost all educated people all over the world. It's the basis of the educational system, the National Health Service, the Medical Research Council, governments, and it's just the default worldview of educated people. But I think every one of these dogmas is very, very questionable. And when you look at it, it turns they fall apart.
Evidently, there were no answers, not in our culture. It was at this point that I discovered the existence of an underground. Furthermore, it definitely is not limited to the United States, but infiltrates all of Western civilization. Many people have heard of it vaguely, or casually have come in contact with it, and passed it off as just people with queer ideas. For one thing is usually certain. Members of this underground who are respected in their communities don't talk about the interest or beliefs that qualify them for membership unless they know you too are in the club. The basic public reaction is, you don't really believe in that stuff, do you? Who then makes up the mass of this underground? Contrary to what one might expect, they are not merely a conglomerate of silly, uneducated, superstitious, unreasoning misfits. True, some of the like are included, but at no greater percentage than is found in the general population. As a matter of fact, if it could be surveyed, it is quite probable that their average IQ would be far above that of a general cross-section of Western humanity. The common bond or cause that draws them together is simple. All have a belief that 1. Man's inner self is neither understood nor fully expressed in our contemporary society. And two, this inner self has capabilities to act and perform mentally and materially to a degree unknown and unrecognized by modern science. These are people whose prime avocation is to read, talk, think, discuss, and participate in anything psychic or spiritual. This is all that is needed for membership. Perhaps you are in the club and didn't realize it. How do people get that way? The most common answer is to experience or be a part of some phenomenon that cannot be explained by modern scientific, philosophic, or religious teachings. One type of person shrugs it off, sweeps it under the rug, and forgets about it. The other, who eventually becomes a member, tries to find some answers. I qualified for membership because I couldn't find any other source of information. There were those who seriously considered the possibility that the second state could and did happen. It soon became apparent that the underground started more than 100 years ago, or earlier, when present-day science began to organize man's concepts and rid them of unreasoning, unsupported knowledge. In such efforts to purify, anything that did not or had not yet met the test of empiricism was ruthlessly discarded by intellectual leadership. Those who continued to hold any of the discarded beliefs fell into disrepute. If they stubbornly persisted and still wished to be active and accepted in society, they had no choice but to go underground with their secret ideas while maintaining another image publicly. Many who refused to practice this deceit became martyrs. To date, in this enlightened society, the same attitude still exists to a very great extent. Of the professionals who are known by their fellows as proponents of parapsychology or anything similar, there may be 5 who still command admiration and respect publicly from their profession, be it medicine, psychology, psychiatry, or the physical sciences. At this stage, I believe I have met all 5. Sadly, I am little wiser through no fault of theirs. They just don't know much about the second state or second body. Most of all, I enjoy the people I have met in the underground. I found them in small towns, big cities, in business, in church groups, in universities, and even in the American Psychiatric Association. As a rule, they are truly gentle people. They are jolly, with a warm sense of humor. They are a happy group who can laugh when necessary at their own serious interest. Whether intentionally or not, they are the most altruistic and empathetic cross-section of humanity I have known. It was in my readings and contacts with this branch of human thought I fondly call the underground that I finally found strong glimmerings of what was happening to me. If I hadn't been involved personally, I would not have believed what I found. At the same time, it was comforting to discover that I was not unique. What was it all about? Simply, I was performing astral projection. Dr. Bradshaw had given me the clue, although he himself had heard about such things only remotely. Astral projection, to the uninitiated, is a term given to the technique of leaving one's physical body temporarily and moving about in a non-material or astral body. Many connotations have been given the word astral, and many interpretations, scientific and otherwise. The word scientific is used cautiously, because the modern scientific world, in the West at least, neither recognizes nor is seriously aware of even the possibility of such things. In the obscure history of mankind, it is an entirely different matter. The word astral has dim origins in early mystical and occult events, which involve witchcraft, sorcery, incantations, and other seeming foolishness, which modern man looks upon as silly and superstitious nonsense. As no attempt was made to delve deeply into this area, I still don't know what the word astral means. Thus, I prefer to stick to the terms second body and second state.
But this is the way it works. And this is the big paradigm shift that the sciences have been looking for the last 100 years, since quantum mechanics was started. And everybody realized that they didn't really understand the world after all. So anyway.
So you are a piece of consciousness.
Yes, you're a subset of this larger consciousness system.
So
you're getting a data stream. That data stream, you're the player. The data stream defines your reality. Just like if you're playing World of Warcraft, you get a data stream. That data stream is displayed as 1 million pixels on your screen, and you look at those pixels and you see rivers and streams and people and houses, and you turn that data into physical reality. And that's the way it is with us. We're getting a data stream. Out of body, you just shift to a different data stream. There's other things going on. There's The Sims playing someplace else. You shift to a data stream, and now suddenly you're not in a World of Warcraft reality anymore. You're in a Sims reality. So that's how you really go out of body. It's entirely mental. It has nothing to do. It's just consciousness. It turns out all things paranormal, like out of body is a paranormal thing, all things paranormal happen with the intuitive side of your mind, not the intellectual side. And as much as people try to get there from the intellectual side, they fail. They can't do that. You have consciousness has two different ways of processing information. One is logically, that's the intellectual side, and the other is intuitively. Okay, that's the intuitive side. So you have these two pathways. Now, in our culture, we work on that intellectual side, that logic side, and we hone that. We start learning things in kindergarten and up, and we learn that, and we hone it. We get good at it. We go to school. We go to graduate school. The intuitive side, science tells you it doesn't even exist. We don't work at it. But if you do work at it, if you put serious energy over a serious amount of time into that intuitive side, you find out that it's just as reliable, just as accurate as the intellectual side, except there's a big difference between them. On the intellectual side, you've got logic, but logic needs data. If you're going to use, deductive logic, you've got to have data to plug in order to see what's logical. And most of the time, we don't have the data. The questions and the things we want to know that are really important, like, should I marry Sally or should I marry Sue? There's no data that you can put in to come to a logical conclusion. And only the most trivial things do you have enough data. Where are my car keys? Well, where was I last? When did I get out of the car? What jacket was I wearing? What pants was I wearing? To go check the pockets. Then where did I go? And logic can help you out because it's a simple problem. But if it's not so simple a problem, logic has its limitations because you don't have the data. On the intuitive side, it's totally beyond logic. There is no logic. You just know. It just happens. The information comes to you. It's intuitive. And on that side, it takes, just like the intellectual side, a lot of practice and a lot of work in order to hone that and educate it and understand it. But when you do, you get information. There is information available to you. There's a database out there, and that database is required. The reason it's there is because it's required for the rendering. You have the larger conscious system configures a piece of itself to be the computer, and that computer, in order to compute this reality, needs information, needs data. So it creates a database from which it takes information and helps it create. So the rendering engine needs that, but you are really a piece of consciousness. That information is in the consciousness system. You're a piece of that, so you have access to it. The Hindus called that the Akashic Records.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what they called it. But everybody who has learned how to control and work with their intuitive side knows is that you can get information comes to you. Sometimes it's precognitive, that comes from the future probable database. Sometimes it's historical. Sometimes it's all kinds of data. So out of body is you just switch to a different data stream. Now you're in a different, what I call reality frame. So that's what that is. The paranormal, all of those things are just the way consciousness works. There's a few things about consciousness, a few facts of consciousness. One, all consciousness are netted. So you can interact with any other consciousness, and that includes your dog or your cat or other people, and you can trade information. And humans do that all the time, but they're not aware of it. You ever meet somebody and you just like them, or you just don't like them? Yeah, you've traded some information there. There's a lot of things that come to people intuitively. Most of the best art and the best writing all comes out of that intuitive channel, where the artist has learned to work in that intuitive channel. It gets downloads, they call it, again, a computer metaphor. So that exists, and very few people really learn to develop that intuitive side to the point that it is really reliable. Artists do, but only in them as much as they can do their art, or writers only in so much as they get downloads about the plot and the story and the characters. Muse. Yeah. So there's a lot of things, though. The remote viewing, the healing with your mind. No, that's not data out of a database. There's another attribute of this system. It's kind of our feedback for us to see how we're doing, and that is that in this database, things are in terms of probability. Probabilities that thing will happen. What are the possibilities and all the probabilities of those possibilities? Okay, that's how the database is constructed. And it's constructed about the future. Okay, in the next 10 to the minus 44 seconds, what are the possibilities and what are the probabilities of each possibility? And the way the system works is that it takes a random draw from that probability distribution of the possibilities, and that's what happens next. Okay, that understanding that lets you understand quantum physics.
And all of us have the choice, really, what to believe. Do we trust our own direct experience? When we have the experience of our mind being connected with something far greater than ourselves? Or do we trust a theory, the materialist theory, that says the mind is nothing but the activity of the brain, therefore it's all inside the head? A theory which is notoriously poor on understanding consciousness. The very existence of consciousness is the hard problem from the materialist theory. That's a question we all have to make, whether we put that theory first or our own experience first. We may start, as I did when I started meditating, with a materialist theory of the mind. I thought it was all inside my head. But partly as a result of my own experiences, I came to the conclusion that was too narrow a view, and it was better to trust my own direct experience of consciousness. And this is, again, a point where science and spiritual practices come into a fairly close connection, because science, after all, is based on the experimental method, experience. Experiments mean empirical means experience. Experiments are about experience. And spiritual experience is about experience too. Science is ultimately based on experience. And in French, the same word, expérience, means experiment and experience. So when we're exploring consciousness, is it better to explore it externally through studying the brain, or internally through the actual experience of consciousness itself? And meditation enables us to explore the nature of consciousness directly. And ideally, I think we need both, and that's what the scientific study of spiritual practices is giving us. It doesn't necessarily commit us to a reductionist view that is nothing but the activity of the brain. It's true that when people have mystical experiences, particular parts of the brain become active, but that doesn't prove it's nothing but the brain. You're having a non-mystical experience right now of seeing me standing here. And if someone measured your brain activity, there would be changes in your brain associated with the image of me and hearing my words, which would be changes, measurable changes in your brain. But the fact there are measurable changes in your brain when you see and hear me doesn't prove I'm nothing but your brain. Fortunately, for me, I have an independent existence, and it's a kind of interaction. And so it may well be that when our consciousness connects with higher forms of consciousness, if such forms exist, that the brain changes in particular ways, but it doesn't prove that it's nothing but those changes in the brain.
What is an out-of-the-body experience?
What is it? Well, it's best described as a state of consciousness awareness that does not depend on physical sensory input, meaning it is acting separate and apart from your physical body. Recent studies indicated that 25% of the population in the United States remembers having at least one spontaneous out-of-body experience. There's been a lot of scientific discussion as to what that is, and our religions have given it a name too. But basically, you are able to exercise facsimiles is the best word, of the sensory input that you have in the physical sense, in the physical continuity, as it were. So if you can think of that you are perceiving and separate and apart from this physical mechanism that provides you with this input, you're able to see, for example, and you are able to hear. That out-of-body consciousness, as it were, is able to be, let's say, 2 inches away from the physical, or if you want to put it at the extreme, you can go to Mars and cruise around Mars and see what's going on there. It's that unlimited.
Now, there are those who would refer to this as the astral body. Would that be a good term to use here?
Well, we don't like it, and the reason we don't like it is because it has sort of an occult connotation to it, in the sense that it was used in a time sort of prior to the scientific model that we attempt to follow. So we way back in the early 60s, came up with the OB, out-of-body experiences. We were and are professional sound people. In other words, sound was our business, the production of sound in various ways. So we turned to sound quite naturally in order to do these things. First of all, in order to find out how we could begin to control the out-of-body experience, we began to use sound. Sound to affect consciousness. We soon learned that by using known brainwave frequencies and converting them into what sound amplitudes, not frequency, but sound amplitudes, we are able to induce sleep very easily and to stay awake very easily. And that was the beginning. Those are categories of consciousness. And we use that running frequency of amplitude to create a resonance by listening to it. And these induce various states of consciousness, basically. We call it a frequency following response because you can identify them by taking an EEG, a brainwave study, and see these particular patterns within the brain. So if you wanted a person to go to sleep, you would feed a particular system of theta and delta waves, and they would get sleepy. And then as we went on, we found a better way to do it, because these brainwave frequencies that are common in the human brain are of a frequency that is lower than human hearing. Let's use an illustration that here's an 8 hertz signal, which means 8 cycles per second, that we cannot hear. So how to get it into the human brain other than using an amplitude method? We found the binaural beat would work very beautifully in that respect. But in essence, it works this way. If we put a 100 hertz audio signal, which you can hear, and put it in one ear, and put a 108 hertz signal in the other ear, the differential between those two would be an 8 hertz signal. When we used that and had a person listen to it, the brain would synthesize that 8 hertz frequency. The brain wouldn't hear it, incidentally, but the electrical signals in the brain synthesize that 8 hertz differential. A slight variation of it as far as the Schumann resonance is the one that we as humans grew up with through millions of years, and it will create a form of physical relaxation. There are different kinds of meditative states. For example, years back, there was a great to-do about getting into the alpha state, and it was, let's get ourselves into alpha. Alpha is just a state of conscious relaxation, and we have not found it interesting enough to play with.
What about theta?
Theta is a state where a lot of creativity occurs in theta. It's great for ideas, word pictures, and things like that. The crossover state between this type of consciousness and the consciousness of delta sleep. Because of that, you are partially freed of the restrictions that are upon you during this normal wakefulness here. And as a result, you are freed, your mind is freed to perceive in ways it has not perceived before. And that's where a lot of meditation takes place.
So you like to look at this thing in a pragmatic way, I guess, scientifically speaking.
Very much.
All right, now let's say then pragmatically, what would be the purpose of an out-of-the-body experience then?
Well, that's the enigma, the question. That took me a lot of work to find out what value it had, if any. And the second thing is that through the years, what purpose? That's open to a lot of discussion. There have been all sorts of ways that one can use it and one does use it. I think the key thing is to recognize that we are firmly sure now that everyone goes out of their body during what we call delta sleep or deep sleep. But that's a sleep where you are at very low level of physical response. And it's that deep sleep that we all have during our sleep cycle for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes and maybe sometimes more. We all have cycles of delta. We have cycles of an hour and a half cycle of sleep, a pattern we have all during our whole sleep period. But a part of that is the delta sleep state. And we sort of drift down to that delta state, and then we get there, and then we become totally inert. Blood pressure goes down, temperature goes down, and we respond very little to any external stimulus. We found in lab studies that a person in the out-of-body state resembles near perfectly the profile of delta sleep.
All right, now the difference, of course, is their consciousness. Is that right?
That's true. A person in the out-of-body state, by a peculiar kind of means of establishing a relationship with the physical body, can report in while they're in the out-of-body state.
All right, now let me stop for a second. What you're saying is that people that you have worked with recorded out-of-body experiences. Is that correct?
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Those experiences from those people are such that they're actually able to respond while they are out of body. What do we know about that then?
They report what they're doing and how they're doing. Some, very few, and it is few, you can communicate back to them. In other words, they're using their hearing and vocal means to, in turn, stay in contact with you. It's a learned thing, a thing that you have to learn. And not everyone can do it.
Now, if an EEG looks at a person who is talking to you during this state, does the EEG show delta still?
It shows delta superimposed with a beta signal, or a composite beta signal, that indicates a part of the brain is operating to do this communication process.
I know that's very interesting. I presume that was really interesting. Actually.
Yeah, the speech center becomes activated.
Okay, so let's come back then to this question then that I started out with. I'm sure, Robert, that this question was asked when, for example, Columbus went to the New World. People said, why would you want to go there? So I'm sure that this question is being asked now to you. Why would people want to do this type of research?
Well, I had to face that question all the way back in, would you believe it, back in 1958 and 59, which is a long ways back. I desperately need to learn how to control it because I would suddenly move out of my body anytime I would lie down, and that became very embarrassing and very frightening. And I had to learn how to control it. Conventional science had no answer whatsoever for that. My close friends, psychologists and psychiatrists, didn't have the answer either. So we set up an R&D program in my company trying to find out answers for this. And one of the things that happened, it took, for example, a full year of validation and documentation of where I went and what I did and what I perceived in order for me to recognize that it was nothing more than an hallucination. So it's not that easy to transfer it from what might be a dream or an hallucination into a reality. It just takes that left brain of ours. It takes sometimes a great deal of evidence to convince us.
Are you saying then that when a person first has an out-of-body experience, they may not be able to logically understand what has happened?
That's quite true. And we rationalized it away because we just don't have culturally any answer for it. The best way I can describe that is, for example, that we now know that anyone who has a flying dream is symbolizing an out-of-body state. They can't identify it any other way. So they have a flying dream. And some people have to rationalize it by saying they were in an airplane.
So they're actually experiencing the feeling of free flight.
Mm-hmm.
And then through the dream, they interpret it in whatever way they can through their logic.
Yes, and virtually all cases that we've encountered where a person has a falling dream, and that's re-entering the physical body. You can pick up hundreds of thousands of people who have had a falling dream where they fall and wake up, and that's re-entering the physical. Their interpretation of it, because they are totally unaware of it, has to translate it somehow so they do the best they can.
One item we do know: the reality of your reading these words with your left brain hemisphere is the first stage of filtration. In our action-oriented society, when a man lies down to sleep, he is effectively out of the picture. He will lie still for 6 to 8 hours, so he is not behaving, thinking productively, or doing anything significant. We all know that people dream, but we raise our children to regard dreams and other experiences occurring during sleep as unimportant, as not real in the way that the events of the day are. Thus, most people are in the habit of forgetting their dreams, and on the occasions when they do remember them, they usually regard them as mere oddities. It is true that psychologists and psychiatrists regard the dreams of patients as useful clues to the malfunctioning of their personalities. But even in this application, dreams and other nocturnal experiences are generally not treated as real in any sense, but only as some sort of internal data processing of the human computer. There are some important exceptions to this general put-down of dreams, but for the vast majority of people in our society today, dreams are not things that serious people concern themselves with. What are we to make of a person who takes exception to this general belief, who claims to have had experiences during sleep or other forms of unconsciousness that were not only impressive to him, but which he feels were real? Suppose this person claims that on the previous night he had an experience of flying through the air over a large city, which he soon recognized as New York. Further, he tells us that not only was this dream intensely vivid, but that he knew at the time that it was not a dream, that he was really in the air over New York City. And this conviction that he was really there sticks with him for the rest of his life, despite our reminding him that a sleeping man couldn't really be flying by himself in the air over New York City. Probably we will ignore a person who makes such a report, or we will politely or not so politely inform him that he is becoming a little weak in the head or crazy. We are not dealing with a purely hypothetical situation. Such events have been termed traveling clairvoyance, astral projection, or a more scientific term, out-of-the-body experiences, OOBEs. We can formally define an OOBE as an event in which the experiencer, 1, seems to perceive some portion of some environment which could not possibly be perceived from where his physical body is known to be at the time, and 2, knows at the time that he is not dreaming or fantasizing. The experiencer seems to possess his normal consciousness at the time, and even though he may reason that this cannot be happening, he will feel all his normal critical faculties to be present, and so knows he is not dreaming. Further, he will not decide after awakening that this was a dream. How then do we understand this strange phenomenon? If we look to scientific sources for information about OOBEs, we shall find practically none at all. Scientists have, by and large, simply not paid any attention to these phenomena. The situation is rather similar to that of the scientific literature on extrasensory perception, ESP. Phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis are impossible in terms of the current physical worldview. Since they can't happen, most scientists do not bother to read the evidence indicating that they do happen. Hence, not having read the evidence, their belief in the impossibility of such phenomena is reinforced. This kind of circular reasoning in support of one's comfortable belief system is not unique to scientists by any means, but it has resulted in very little scientific research on ESP or OOBEs. In spite of the lack of hard scientific data, there are still a number of definite conclusions one can make from reading what material there is. First, OOBEs are a universal human experience, not in the sense that they happen to large numbers of people, but in that they have happened all through recorded history. And there are marked similarities in the experience among people who are otherwise extremely different in terms of cultural background. One can find reports of OOBEs by housewives in Kansas, which closely resemble accounts of OOBEs from ancient Egyptian or Oriental sources. Second, the OOBE is generally a once-in-a-lifetime experience, seemingly experienced by accident. Illnesses sometimes bring it about, especially illnesses which are almost fatal. Great emotional stress sometimes brings it about. In many cases, it simply happens during sleep, without our having any idea of what might have caused it. We can formally define an OOBE as an event in which the experiencer, 1, seems to perceive some portion of some environment which could not possibly be perceived from where his physical body is known to be at the time, and 2, knows at the time that he is not dreaming or fantasizing. The experiencer seems to possess his normal consciousness at the time, and even though he may reason that this cannot be happening, he will feel all his normal critical faculties to be present, and so knows he is not dreaming. Further, he will not decide after awakening that this was a dream. How then do we understand this strange phenomenon? If we look to scientific sources for information about OOBEs, we shall find practically none at all. Scientists have, by and large, simply not paid any attention to these phenomena. The situation is rather similar to that of the scientific literature on extrasensory perception, ESP. Phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis are impossible in terms of the current physical worldview. Since they can't happen, most scientists do not bother to read the evidence indicating that they do happen. Hence, not having read the evidence, their belief in the impossibility of such phenomena is reinforced. This kind of circular reasoning in support of one's comfortable belief system is not unique to scientists by any means, but it has resulted in very little scientific research on ESP or OOBEs. In spite of the lack of hard scientific data, there are still a number of definite conclusions one can make from reading what material there is. First, OOBEs are a universal human experience, not in the sense that they happen to large numbers of people, but in that they have happened all through recorded history. And there are marked similarities in the experience among people who are otherwise extremely different in terms of cultural background. One can find reports of OOBEs by housewives in Kansas, which closely resemble accounts of OOBEs from ancient Egyptian or Oriental sources. Second, the OOBE is generally a once-in-a-lifetime experience, seemingly experienced by accident. Illnesses sometimes bring it about, especially illnesses which are almost fatal. Great emotional stress sometimes brings it about. In many cases, it simply happens during sleep, without our having any idea of what might have caused it.
One of the most interesting facets of out-of-body activity that has certainly been attracting attention over the last, say, 10 years. What is it? Something like 25 million people that they know of that have had it, and that's a near-death experience, which is a rather extreme version of the out-of-body. The one thing that certainly does with everyone who has an NDE, as they call it, is get them past the belief stage into the knowing that they survive physical death. That is a very profound piece of knowledge, that if you get that knowledge, it alters your life considerably. Now we have better and more scientific explanation for what's taking place. Think of it this way. I, at this moment, are very carefully focused in time-space. We have a focusing mechanism that we call a physical body, and it gives us all this heavy physical sensory input that gets us and keeps us phased into time-space. In other words, we're here. Our consciousness is here. Our mind is totally here. The moment that you stop focusing in that time-space that intently, let's call it inattention, just that much, you've become slightly out of phase with this physical time-space. This means that you are in thought, as it were, instead of totally there. And let's say that you're still 90 degrees focused in time-space and 10 degrees into something, somewhere, some way else. And then you have the stages called daydreaming, which are a little more out of phase. And then you have a controlled out of phase state, say, call it meditation, where let's say that you are 30 to 35% phased into another reality system or getting in touch with it, while you are still, great part of you is still in phase with time-space. Doesn't take much to follow that phasing relationship outward to where you get into states caused by drugs, alcohol, and things like that, where you are more and more out of phase. You get into illnesses, and they create greater degree of out of phase. And very innocently, we all fall asleep. And then we are, say, 90 degrees out of phase. We're still in touch with time-space, but our consciousness, our mind is elsewhere. So that's a real quick version of what we call phasing. This is, as we now perceive it, is a mass of phase relationships of which the out-of-body is one part of a spectrum. If you can think of consciousness as being a spectrum that encompasses time-space here on Earth and moves into other energy systems as it changes in pattern, so that when you are asleep, you are drifting even deeper into what I said, into delta sleep, where you are very much, say, 90% out of phase with time-space. And this means that you have an awareness, a consciousness there. The fact that you don't remember it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Let me see. Am I going to guess that 100% is death?
100% is death, yes. And all that is very simply that if you have that wonderful knowledge that you do survive physical death, no matter what you do and act and be and think here, you are merely then don't have a focusing mechanism to phase you into time-space. It's all fallen apart, so you can't stay here any longer. Then you are there. You are there in that area past delta sleep. But you are there, you're conscious, you're, quote, awake, and you have means of perceiving there. And that's what the out-of-body state is a temporary visit there, if you want to think of it that way.
What is focus 10?
10 is a very specific state that might be called a meditative state, but we make it much simpler than that and keep it very broad range. We take a simple definition and say the mind is awake, body is asleep. The body is just detuned, actually, so that these heavy physical sensory input patterns are not interfering with your ability to think. People make quite a great discovery in 10 in the sense that they discover they do not need all of that 5 physical sensory patterns in order to be awake, alert, and full of mind consciousness, as it were.
All right, now what about 12 and 15? These are pretty spectacular as far as I was concerned.
Well, they do get fun as they go along. 12 is a thing that we've discovered, and through the years, the state where once having detuned these other physical inputs, we find that you can begin to perceive in other ways. We call it a state of expanded awareness. But what has happened is that these other means of perception have been covered over or overwhelmed by all the physical input. And the moment those get detuned and you still retain your consciousness, you begin to perceive in these other ways. And 15 is an interim nice state, which we call the state of no time. It is fun because people have great expectations of what state of no time is. Not no space, but no time. The interesting part about it, of course, is that nothing is there. People get into 15 and have all these things they expect of it, when it's really, it has to be a self-instigating place. Nothing will happen unless you make it happen. You can lie around in no time forever unless you take thought steps in order to move in any given direction. And this is basically a very careful fear-reducing process so that you're not afraid of these unknown states. And the way we do it is that we prove very succinctly to the individual that he's only learning to control what he's been doing all the time. And it's the control factor that counts. So that when he wants to go to 10, he can do it because he has no fear of it anymore. There is a system of, let's call it helpers, that is a part of each individual. And those helpers are in continual service of that individual and are aimed specifically at that individual. But the interesting part is who they are. They are parts of you, and they are parts of you who have lived previous lives.
So the guides, for example, are existences that we have had and we are now, let's say, compartmentalized right now with a focus. One part of us is focused.
That's right.
In time, space, and the other parts of us are not focused.
That's right. And so you need a little help to fix a sore toe. Well, one of your life personalities 20,000 years ago knows all about fixing sore toes.
How do we get in touch with them? What focus?
Well, that comes out of 21.
That's focus 21.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other worlds, other beings? What are we looking at then there?
Well, what you're looking at, first of all, are the multitude of, when you get into this non-physical area of being, states of being, the first thing you encounter, of course, is what we call the belief system territories, where one is attracted automatically after they exit here by this phasing process because it's something familiar to them. And these are, of course, all of the various religions have a belief system that creates a state of being in this non-physical area, this non-physical part of this consciousness continuum. I know it sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but it's very simple.
Does that mean that if you are a Christian, you will come across saints and perhaps Jesus the Christ, etc.?
All of that, yes. That is one large part of this consciousness spectrum.
All right, now
so
that
is Buddhism, so is Islam, all sorts of it.
Now, and then you're saying to me that there are people who do not have belief systems, let's say, for example, an atheist or an existentialist.
No, they don't have to be that. They just
right.
Their intellect grows to a point where that's not enough. Would you like to spend all eternity lying on a cloud and strumming a harp?
Absolutely not.
Well, if you can get, and there are a lot of people more people than you would care to think, that are not, let's call it, entrapped in belief systems, then I get around to the basis of what's so stimulating and exciting about the out-of-body experience and becoming proficient at it. You realize there are a myriad of other options. And most of them make the belief systems look rather silly. Those options are so broad and so detailed. I can give you option number 1, which is a very, very common one, and that's to recycle and have another lifetime here. All of us do that many, many times because we have become addicted to being human. We like to eat, we like the sexual drive, we like the excitement, the fun of it, and all the process of being human we like so much that we got to come back and have more. And there's no law that makes you do that. That's the important part. It's you that wants to do this.
So people who say you have to come back because of your karma, you can undo your karma in other places.
And you don't need to undo it. You can undo it yourself by a simple twist of your thinking, that's all. And but you see, that is an option to come back. And each of us probably does that several thousand times, to get an idea. That's the one option, to come back and recycle. And setting the belief systems aside, then you've got this great span of the whole physical universe, and you can go and live another type of intelligent life on some other planet 6 million light years from here or something like that. We know of about 5 anyway already. But mind you, these are not human forms. That's the interesting thing to realize. They're nicely planned and nicely organized. Very beautiful design. In their worlds, these are the dominant species, just as we are the dominant species here on Earth.
So really, they're the top of the chain in that particular place?
That's true. So you say, I'm trying to answer that fundamental question. What would you do with being able to willfully, consciously control and move in the out-of-body state? You can pre-explore all these things before you do have a physical exit here. So you have a pretty good idea what you'd like to do next before you are forced to do this, see? So after you've exhausted the physical universe, which may take an eternity if you want to get addicted there, can you see how easy you get addicted? The point is that these various other intelligent species mature, and I guess that's the word, just as we eventually mature, and we immigrate. And the reason we immigrate is because we've had all we can get out of this, and very frankly, you know what the real reason for immigration is? We become bored. And you can say, how could you possibly become bored? Because you realize that you could become involved here forever in finding out each electron and each biological pattern, everything else, and it goes on endlessly. So if you get a good sampling of it and you find almost that, well, this is where I came in. It's a repeating cycle. And then, of course, the thing you're probably waiting to hear is what do you do in a non-physical sense? That's the vista that truly opens up, because one of the things that you become aware of, that a graduate of this compressed learning human school becomes the equivalent of a god in these other energy systems. Because of things that we learn so naturally, we think are, well, they're just everyday stuff, is exquisitely valuable in these other systems. And as such, the temptation gets very great, not to be a god, but to do things in these other energy systems. For example, I reach and I without thinking, pick up a cup of coffee and sip the coffee and put it down again. That is a manipulation of energy, mechanical energy, electrical energy, and chemical energy, all connected with it. The ease with which we learn to do these kinds of things can be applied in other kinds of energy, can you see? And the other system that we learn so vividly, we learn measurement. It's so hard to understand that, well, everybody learns measurement. So we're a polarized environment. We have good and bad, or constructive or destructive, whatever labels you want to put. So we learn measurement. And that polarity measurement system, again, is very, very valuable in evaluation. What we really have, most of all, we take with us, and you do take it with you, is the thing we came to get. And that is, if we use the symbol left brain, that's what it is. Intelligence, the ability to analyze, calculate. All of that is what you came to get, and you take it with you. And, that's the stuff that is pure, invaluable elsewhere in these other energy systems. The key freedom is freedom from the fear of the unknown, and that principal unknown being what is beyond this physical existence. The moment a person learns that, it alters his life here so spectacularly, because all this, if you look around you, you find so much what you do is based upon fear. And most of it is fear of non-survival, one way or another. So if you can think of that as being a key thing. You also learn to accept and explore one's own self. And that self-exploration takes place, again, on the part of the individual, because once he is free of that fear, then he is free to explore his self first. Never mind all this other spectacular areas. Learn to free himself of all of the restraints that he had self-induced within him.
I'd been given one little moment of miraculous, and that's what I wanted for my whole life. I wanted to know my son. And if he could sit there and look me in the eyes, say my name, and tell me that he loved me, I knew there was hope. Our lives. My hope, which had been sputtering along, now it had gasoline. And so it was explosive in our lives to get my son everything that had been taken from him.
Like all parents in Katie's situation, they go through a period of discovering who their kid is and what they know.
I began to find out that my son knew far beyond what they would teach in a classroom. A lot of history, a lot of important events and spiritual knowledge as well. He had never had any education at all. So I didn't understand how he could know so much.
It's important to note that Houston like thousands of non-speakers around the world, are not taught as if they're smart. They're often taught preschool lessons like colors and shapes on repeat, even through high school.
He was denied any education because they assumed, based on the fact that he can't control his body, he has no understanding of it.
To quickly interject here, if you have a hard time coordinating motor function and regulating your body, testing behavior is not a good way to test intelligence. It's almost like testing a blind person's intelligence by asking them to read. And this is what Katie's getting at. Houston was denied an education because people were judging his behavior and assuming he wasn't smart.
And when he began to explain, he had to teach himself to read. And not just him, but his friends, they would all find incredible ways to educate themselves. If one of them learned something, they would all teach each other.
But how could they teach each other if they couldn't communicate?
I was confused by that. How do y'all have conversations when none of you can speak? And he explained that they all have unique gifts and that they're able to communicate to each other telepathically.
But before exploring the idea that non-speakers can communicate with each other telepathically, I wanted to understand how Katie came to believe her son was telepathic at all. She grew up in a very conservative community and family, and things like telepathy were not ever considered possible. So can you take me back to the very first moment when he first revealed he could read your thoughts and just what your reaction was? That had to be just really
upsetting, terrifying. He'd been just giving me this incredible amount of information. And one of my sons was questioning, how does he know all this? And being very critical. And I was upset with him for being so critical and not believing in his brother. But the question still remained, how was he learning? The question that I asked him was, how did you learn all of this? Do you have really good hearing? And he said, I'm special. And I said, oh, of course you're special. I'm sure he was rolling his eyes in his head. And he said, I can hear thoughts. And I said, bullshit. I did not believe him. And I questioned him and I said, are you sure you're telling the truth? And he said to me, you don't get the kind of gifts that I have if you lie. So then I asked him a question in my head without speaking, and he answered the question that I had asked him in my head. Then I brought my son and his friend up to witness it, and I told the young man that was his friend, I said, Kit, get a thought in your head and sit there and don't think anything but that. And Houston spelled out what that young man was thinking. Then I called my daughter, and she didn't believe me. She said, no, he can't, Mom. I said, send me something. So she had her husband tell her something to text. She texted it to me. He never saw the text, and he spelled out what was on the text.
Did you ask him when his ability to hear thoughts started?
Houston said that he doesn't remember a time when he did not hear thoughts. He also says that everyone with non-speaking and unreliably speaking autism have this ability. All. He said it might differ in strength from one person to another, but they all have this gift.
So can he hear the thoughts of everyone?
Well, yes. So he can hear the thoughts of everyone. But if his anxiety is high, he cannot. It's like the anxiety literally cuts off parts of their brain. So it's a receiver issue. Just like with a good radio signal, you have to remove all interference. Anxiety is interference. So it prevents him from hearing in those types of environments. People's negativity and hatefulness have a huge impact on his ability to hear. Crowds are very difficult, as you can imagine, because he's hearing everybody's. That's hard. You're hearing a thought, but you don't know who's responsible for the thought. I've seen him several times, literally, we'd be at the gym and he would run into a certain room and look around, trying to figure out who had that thought.
gamma frequencies orchestrated by Bob Holbrook and delivered through Monroe Audio Technology support and enhance remote viewing capabilities, out-of-body travel, and profound non-local experiences that add meaning and purpose to people's lives. Participants report expanded awareness that endures, not just to the end of the program, but sometimes we hear back from them much later on. And the consciousness expansion is lasting. Life-enhancing revelations during the program, relief from pain, and sometimes some actual physical healings. Everyone experiences mental clarity and integration, emotional peace and calm, heightened intuition, and profound mystical experiences. Because after all, as this graph shows, what they are doing is moving beyond time and space into the infinite, into other dimensions of awareness. And I'll need to explain this in order for you to understand what we're looking at. So the mind mirror measures an array of frequencies that cluster in these categories: delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, all the way from 0.5 hertz all the way up to 100 hertz frequencies. And we have a completely unique EEG device. There's nothing else like it in the world. It's a dual hemisphere pattern measuring the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. And the interrelationships of the frequency bars between each of these categories, and then the interrelationships of the categories themselves, which through 45 years of monitoring people and conducting our own research, we have discovered gives us an understanding of the actual state of consciousness. So changes in the pattern equate to changes in the state of consciousness. Now I'll say something about this pattern here, which is called the awakened mind. In it, what you see in the orange and yellow bars, which is called beta, these are the beta brainwaves of active external thought. These are very quiet right here. You're not seeing a lot of activity which would relate to list making, decision making, stress, panic, anxiety, that sort of thing. None of that is in this pattern. It is downwardly curved and in beautiful connection with its relaxed, sensory, diffused, detached alpha brainwaves. Alpha, you just heard, is very much associated with healing. And indeed, studies have shown that alpha, actually theta, this combination of these two bars here, is where healing occurs. And you'll see some of that in this show. So alpha has a unique function. Function of serving as a bridge from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind of theta. Inside our theta frequencies, this is where we connect with wherever our memories are stored, and long-term memories, and something we call the essential being. Some people call it the deeper core self. Some people call it the soul. Whatever you call it, when people are in their theta, this is where they connect through their memories, often past life memories, with what needs healing. Because as the repository of long-term memory, our issues are stored here. But this is also where people experience their creativity and their insight and their spiritual awareness. The next and last category down here at the bottom in the purple is called delta, where theta is associated with dreaming, REM sleep. Delta is associated with deep, dreamless, restorative sleep. But in waking states, when we see delta, we know that what we're really looking at is the personal unconscious mind. Those frequencies that are like a kind of radar on an instinctual level that are searching for information, searching for energy, seeking to understand the world and other people through empathy, and also through psychic awareness. So when we see an expansion and amplitude, which is the width of this pattern, the power of the signal, then we're looking at someone who's either having a psychic insight or connecting with the collective unconscious mind. And we would call that the quantum field or source or whatever terms you use. It's searching far beyond self for energy and information beyond the self. And so what we have in this pattern, which Max Cade, the inventor of the mind mirror, back in 1976 found in highly developed and spiritually aware people, is an awakened mind. And that is awake to itself, awake to others, awake to its spirit, having access to the clarity of the conscious mind, the relaxed, diffused sensory awareness of the alpha bridge, the creativity, insight, spirituality of the theta subconscious, and the empathy and psychic awareness of the delta unconscious mind. In one program, Bob Holbrook and Ross Dunsby referred to our brainwave patterns as portals, and indeed that's exactly what they are. The awakened mind of creative flow and peak performance has long been associated with psychic awareness. In fact, it was found in psychics and healers, mediums, and other advanced meditators and other highly developed people. Interestingly, I captured these three images from a previous exercise aria during a discovery program. And this is the same person here that showed this awakened mind. And as the gamma frequencies and the meditations continued, this person developed that much gamma. And you can see the vast difference. This has 2 extra bands that you don't see, and this awakened mind pattern, which stops at 44 hertz. This gamma synchrony pattern includes 2 bands of what we call mid-gamma. The gamma synchrony pattern is called the superconscious mind because it's really about transcendence, love, compassion, mystical union, spiritual ecstasy, even the aha insight, a moment of revelation of, oh, I get it. And in fact, there's a synchronization between the brain lobes across the array of frequencies. This person is completely switched on. And you can note that this is an awakened mind pattern below, same pattern below this gamma. So this person's gamma is beautifully grounded in this theta and delta. And then this pattern in the middle is called the evolved mind. I also took this from the same ARIA recording, and you can see in the gray that this person is experiencing a good bit of upper, mid, and lower gamma, which we have found actually triggers these patterns, that the gamma frequencies and Bob's meditations trigger them sometimes gradually, sometimes suddenly, but they certainly do inform and stabilize the pattern. This evolved mind was until gamma synchrony the highest known state of consciousness, wherein the person lets go of the ego, surrenders to an experience of the field, source, and feels bliss, can feel radiance, sometimes an explosion of light in the energy system, certainly a feeling of oneness. Interesting that it's a circle, and non-duality. And what this is a 100 hertz evolved mind pattern going all the way up. So here we have union with source as high as we can measure in the frequencies. In this meditation, the meditator traveled from constellation to constellation, experienced the peace and perfection of Lyra, Vega, and their planets, and produced this pattern when he realized that he would be able to go to the planets and enjoy the trip. So this is a union of the heart, of the spirit, a moment of tremendous excitement. And you can even see that his gamma down in this composite display was arousing, decreased for a moment, and then he goes to the planets right there, perfectly visible in his pattern. He called this on the mystical scale an 8 out of 10, meaning that he went incredibly high. And we'll look at that mystical scale in a moment. But first, just to show you that we're actually measuring in statistics so that at a specific training level where we see advanced meditators, psychics, healers, mediums, people with extraordinary awakened mind scores, that they are measuring for the awakened mind between 75 and 100%. This person measured 89% on the 100 hertz scale, which is extremely impressive, and so is his gamma synchrony, 83%. Not so high for the evolved mind because he has a bit of a right brain dominance here. Working with some helpers, some assistants, and crunching the data to see what is the relationship between gamma and out-of-body travel and remote viewing. So, of course, we pay very close attention to someone who hits a target score 1. You might be wondering now, what is an 8 of 10 on the mystical scale mean? Well, this is for the person in a subjective way, their way of saying how high they were in the meditation. Starts with the loss of the usual sense of time and space, the experience that this was more real than your normal awareness, a sense that the experience cannot be adequately described in words. And then when you get to that state in consciousness, you may well be having the experience of pure awareness. No more sensation of your body. It's just you and your mind and spirit. Then might come the experience of unity with something larger than yourself, and which would bring a sense of awe or reverence, the experience of bliss or indefinable peace, sensation of being surrounded in light, feelings of universal love. You are convinced that you encountered ultimate reality. Now, we don't define what ultimate reality is, but when people encounter it, they absolutely know it. So what we found during this program, all the programs, is that the gamma waves that are embedded in the 40-minute musical meditations that people are listening to, an enduring gamma, and a gamma that opened like a portal to their being able to experience the meditation, not just on the physical level where I'm an animal and I'm perceiving things about myself, which is the intention of the meditation, but I'm an animal and I perceive multiple levels of understanding of my experience when they have this kind of high 80% gamma like that. This person also had very high gamma scores all the way through, which elevated their awakened mind scores. So this is really beautiful because what it's saying is that people's brainwaves are becoming more coherent, more ordered, more organized, more stable, and thus they are able to attain higher and higher levels of consciousness.
So much goes on in nature. And what you have to calm down to see it. I mean, you have to really calm down. And sometimes I think the power of low doses of psychedelics is simply that they make people sit down, shut up, and pay attention. And that, amazing things go on. Nature is pattern upon pattern on every scale, in energy, in light, in matter, in momentum, in charge, in electric field, in magnetic density. It's just all there to be known. And when you feel out into it, I think these kinds of general principles are what emerge for you. Nature works with such an incredible economy and with such an incredible elegance. I mean, there is no wasted energy. This is what Tao means, It means an appropriate response to every situation, an appropriate tool for every job, an appropriate linguistic response to every situation.
Basically, the idea is to push people toward imagining what they've never imagined and feeling what they've never felt before.